Welcome, everyone. This is the first January 2025 webinar with Matt, also known as the shoeless therapist or the
Correct.
sock full therapist. I always have to add that. The
I know,
sock
I
full
know.
therapist because he's got a zillion socks. What do you
I
got for us today?
you want me to show off the socks
I
today?
do want to show off your socks. We want
Okay.
you to show your
So
socks. Oh, I love those.
so
Those are so
these
fun.
are bananas,
Mhm.
and you can find
The,
here's
there's
a
one on the bottom.
there's a peeled one there, right?
Uh-huh.
But and yeah, they're all over. My favorite socks are ones that are printed everywhere, not just like obviously on the leg, because you don't get I don't show off my legs, I show off my feet, right?
There you go.
And no, I thought these were really fun. I liked the mix of colors and whatnot. I was like, oh, banana socks.
There you go. What's
So
not to love?
seriously. All right. So the first, what we're going to talk about starting off, is actually so there is an amazing man by the name of Doug Braun Harvey who created the Harvey Institute, and he made this list of the 6 principles of sexual health. And we're just going to talk about the first one today. The first principle of sexual health is consent. And because I'm trying to think, I was looking through old videos trying to figure out how much. I mean, I think I've talked a little bit about this, but I don't think I've jumped into it as like a full-blown topic. Um, and the interesting thing about consent, it actually plays into really understanding boundaries. And like I think within the recovery world, boundaries can often get like a really bad rap. Boundaries are crazy important, like so important that the most intimate relationships we ever have will have the most boundaries. Because if I am intimately close to somebody, and even by intimate, I just mean emotionally connected, right? So but the most connected relationships I ever have will have the most boundaries because we are so close that I want to know, I yearn to know what your needs and wants are so that I can show up for them or recognize that I can't show up for them. And so knowing somebody's boundaries is actually a gift. Unfortunately, in the recovery world, as somebody is learning to have wants and needs, oftentimes they can be interpreted as like a punishment or a consequence. And I mean, obviously, all of our choices have consequences. And if I don't honor your need or your want, there may in fact be a consequence that occurs, but which would just be like anything else. If I don't obey the speed limit, there may in fact be a consequence of a ticket or,
Mhm.
whatever. And so when you get down to understanding consent, I think consent is so important because if I can show you that I respect your needs and wants, and again, in the most intimate way possible for some people is going to be sexual. And so the need for consent sexually is huge. But consent plays out in all parts of our lives as we learn as a couple, especially if we're just starting recovery. As we learn and seek to practice concepts of consent in our relationship, it will spill out into our sexual relationship and everywhere else. And so it seems funny, but I've watched couples on my couch who, somebody will say something really maybe difficult or scary, and their partner will just reach over and pull them in and
Mhm.
hold them close. And there's lots of times that I think, oh my gosh, that's beautiful.
Mhm.
And there's other times where I'll watch body language and I'll think, did you want them to do that? And I will often
Oh,
say, as a therapist, are you okay with that? And they're like, well, I mean, yeah, I know they love me. And I'm like, yeah, but is that what you wanted? and they will say to me, well, honestly, no, like I don't, like when I get emotional like this, I don't want touched. And it's like, oh, so that's your preference. Now sometimes they don't even know what their wants are. In the moment, I'm watching body language, and until I call it out, they're like, well, I guess I didn't really think about it, but no, I don't like it. And so I will teach my couples, like, start practicing as a couple. Hey, when I do this, do you enjoy that? Hey, when I don't do this, do you enjoy that? Like, and so, because then you start really gaining an understanding of consent. And it seems really maybe kind of silly, but I will often say, start by saying, hey, I really want to reach out and hold your hand. Would you be okay with that? And do that enough times so that you find out, wow, so if I'm hearing you correctly, there is never a time where I reach out and hold your hand where you don't give consent. Right. So and if you look, just really basic understandings and principles of things that we would normally take for granted, we start practicing the concept of consent. And oftentimes, I'm going to try and pull up my, I have a slide here, and I'm trying to figure out how to get it going.
Oh, you're co-host, so you should be able to share.
Okay. All right. I'll do this. So I have changed a few of the words here that I feel like fit for couples, but it's the general idea is taken from the Harvey Institute. Let me pull this up. All right, slideshow. Okay, so I'm going to go through this. The first principle of sexual health is consent. Consent is the most universal sexual health principle on the planet. Consent means voluntary cooperation, and it communicates permission to try and reach sexual satisfaction and intimacy with willing partners. And as I was kind of spreading that out, consent means voluntary cooperation in any context, right? Like I said, I've watched couples give each other a hug, and one of them, body language wise, wasn't consenting, or they reach out and hold their hand, and body language wise, there isn't consent. And so that's where, as a couple, we start to explore consent on every level. But in the sexual relationship, consent is, I want to try and reach sexual satisfaction and intimacy with you as my partner. And understanding that level and what that means. Consent isn't necessarily, or may not be, I feel pressured and I'm only doing this because I don't want you to be mad at me. Right? Like, when you start to explore what consent looks like, consent transforms the act of sex from an invasion, an intrusion, or a violation into an act of transformation. And I love this this next part. Establishing consent throughout a sexual interaction provides partners a space for sexual safety and pleasure that is consistent with their sexual desires. When consent is given, I love this phrase, one is saying, I want this experience to have an effect on me. I want this to change me, to give me something that I desire, and I want you as my partner to provide that for me. Like, I love that phrase because it's way more than just, like, if you think about it, like, full consent is way more than just, well, I guess I'm willing. Like, right? And sometimes we might be like, I'm really not in the mood, but I'm not unwilling to see where this goes. I'm not unwilling. And so it might seem silly, but sometimes I'll say, a lot of couples will have to practice, like, for instance, like, hey, I'm not unwilling to have you shower with me. However, I don't want it to be anything more than just a shower. We're just showering, spending time together, right? And so you look at all the different levels. Too often within a relationship, that sexual experience, it starts with a shower, it starts with a massage or whatever it might be. And the person immediately is like, I don't even want a shower, I don't want a massage, because the pressure, right? And I'll tell you, in learning about sexual health, pressure kills arousal and desire faster than anything else. And so somebody will be like, I just don't even want the pressure. And then they're like, well, I don't understand why I don't have why my libido is so low. And it's because like we have to figure out like, how do we get rid of this pressure? Well, when we have sexual compulsivity in a relationship, and which often means we lack awareness not only for ourselves but for our partner, then there is oftentimes this pressure that we don't even know that we're putting onto our partner, or our partner doesn't even know or understand. Man, it doesn't seem to matter what I do sexually or what I don't do sexually, like there's always this pressure. And so oftentimes that just kills the desire within a relationship. And so we don't typically consent in a relationship when we don't feel safe. And I would argue that even when there are heightened emotional situations within a sexual relationship, we don't, like, let's say somebody wants fear as part of their sexual relationship. If they don't feel safe, they're not going to allow that to happen. And so even if somebody was like, hey, I want to have sex play with fear involved, really it's all about establishing safety and making sure that we know what the boundaries and rules are within that experience, and therefore removing that lack of safety and removing the pressure. And so gaining a greater understanding that consent shows up everywhere in our lives. Like, think about this as a kid. What were you taught about consent? It's like, oh, Uncle Charlie wants to give me a hug, and my mom always tells me I have to hug Uncle Charlie, even though he makes me feel uncomfortable. But you know what? I'm going to let Uncle Charlie hug me. I'm going to let him kiss me on the lips or something. And even though I'm not comfortable with it. Or if a parent says, I don't care how old you are, you're kissing me on the lips. It's like that when we don't learn that we're allowed to have body autonomy, when we don't learn that we're allowed to have different wants and needs, then what we learn is consent isn't valuable. And you start looking at that all over in our lives. It's not just a sexual concept by any means. We have to then learn as individuals, and therefore often as couples, if I establish consent in I'll say it this way, a ridiculous number of places with my spouse, and I'm frequently checking in and making sure I have consent, I establish an incredible amount of safety. And there may be times where my spouse is like, look, you don't ever have to ask me for that again, right? Like, and I'm like, okay, well, that's good to know. I still might, especially if I notice that there's maybe something off or awkward, and I still might establish consent. But learning that concept, I would argue for people, especially fresh in recovery, I would say overplay the need for consent, because you may have no idea how important it is to establishing safety in the relationship, especially because there have been behaviors that likely have been non-consensual that have broken so much trust. So with that, Tammy, questions, comments, thoughts?
So this last little piece you're talking about, like, I may still do it even if you said, but you talked about like you're reading a sign, something changed, like you're being aware. And I think that is such a difficult place, to get to initially, particularly for an addict partner. Yeah, I'm not saying impossible, but if you're that disconnected and everything, reading the room can be challenging. So I was even thinking, like, when you're talking about, it's like being curious, like it takes some vulnerability, to be willing to be curious enough, you know, because like, do you like that when I do whatever, like you might say no, you know, and like I have to be willing to hear not particularly, and not have it go, oh, I've done it wrong, and like all of those things. So like it's like all of this is fantastic and useful, and we still have to be able to show up and hold the space for ourselves and our partners in order to get that, information that will be really useful, but
Yeah.
like, even, like all of this, I was like, oh, pressure kills desire. And I'm like, you know what, if you have a conversation and say, you know, can we shower together? And it's like, if it's just a shower, and we're not going to shower together. I'm just saying. But like, if we say, if we're
Did you
going to do
did
that,
you just turn to your partner and tell
I
him
know, I
that?
just, no, I was looking at all these people and going, this is not about us. This is just a general conversation. Yeah. So
We're
I don't
talking
want if
conceptually.
we're talking conceptually, yeah. Anyway, but like if we say that, and I go, if it's just a shower, okay, then we've had that communication. If it's always, it feels like, well, that's what you say, and then it's going to lead to, and
Right.
like so it's really, how do you navigate that space and make sure that you're holding your space and the space for another?
It's so interesting because I've found that a lot of people in recovery, it goes a couple of different ways. Sometimes they'll say, I'm so afraid that I'm going to break that trust, like that I'm
Oh,
going to say, no, this will just be a shower. They're like, I'm so afraid that I can't do that, that I'll just never shower with them. And I'm
oh,
like, man, I appreciate like that inner honesty, and like you probably need to say, hey, I'm going to shower until I can't anymore, and like, and then I'm going to get out of the shower and I'll have to come back in, when you're done, or whatever it might be. Like, you want to push yourself as much as possible to like explore and understand, how do I learn to show up for my spouse without avoiding the
oh, yeah.
uncomfortable situations, right? Because too often it's like, well, I don't want the discomfort and the fact that I might fail, so I'm just going to never do it. Well, we're never reestablishing trust at that point, right? So and we can't live our lives just avoiding the behavior or any possibility of the behavior that we're never going to get to. Like, we've got to figure out, how do I live a healthy life while still engaging the way I want to engage with people? Um, but while we're practicing building that resiliency and that tolerance to that discomfort, we're open with our spouse about it. Like, hey, I'd like to give you a massage, and the moment that like I realize I can't just keep it a massage, I'm gonna tell you, and I'm gonna walk out of the room. Are you willing to let me explore that space with you? Right? And most partners are going to be like, oh my gosh, yes, man, I wish you would have developed this skill. I wish you would have had this before we ever got together, right? Because it's like, oh, you know yourself well enough that you can like exercise restraint and like learn and figure out how to push through it. It's like, oh, heck yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like I'm working on creating a safe space. I'm
Yeah.
not
And
promising you that I'm like things aren't going to be pushing the edge, but I'm going to have my wherewithal to be able to go, okay, that's as far as I can tolerate right now, and this is what I'm going to do. But you've also, again, talked about it. You said, and if I need to step away, I'm going to step away. So it isn't like just abandoning someone. You're not abandoning your partner. You're saying, this is what we're going to try. We're going to see how it goes, and if I need space and I need to separate, I'm going to do that. But I'm going to tell you, and then I'm going to go do that. Right?
absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a beautiful, it's a space where people often ask me, how do I build safety? And sometimes it's too broad of a question. I don't always know how to answer, but this is one of those areas that, like, telling your partner, I know I've struggled with this, but I want to learn how to provide this. Can you give me space to try and possibly even mess up, and like and learn from it? Like, can you be patient while I figure this out, because I want you and I to both have this thing. like, oh my gosh, that's huge for creating safety. And so I highly recommend that every couple, no matter where you're at in recovery, you're having conversations about this. One of the things that I remember, I've changed language because I understand it better now. I will often ask people, in understanding their sexual history, whether it's a couple or even the individual, I'll often ask, tell me how many consensual versus non-consensual sexual experiences or relationships have you had? And they go, it'll make them stop, and they'll go, well, you know what, I've never thought about it that way, right? And because the questions really are, it's not right. Like, if you think about it, and I'm trying to figure out how to say this, I'm going to say it like with a more violent word, but like, if I were to say to somebody, how many times have you been raped, right? Like, that's like, oh my gosh, right? Like, well, that's never happened. And okay, that's fine. How many non-consensual sexual experiences have you had? And it makes somebody kind of go, oh, like, well, let me think about that, right? Like, I maybe I wouldn't call it rape, but like, I might recognize that I wasn't that, I don't know that that was consensual, right? And so now, as a partner, if I start asking my partner, how many times have you felt like it's been non-consensual between us? Teach me when it feels that way. When does it not feel that way? Here's where I'm worried it might feel that way, right? And now we're having a conversation about this attitude, this pressure, or feeling that exists or doesn't exist within the relationship. But like, we don't normally have a conversation about that as a couple.
So like you're talking about non-consensual, but I like that you, even if you say, are there times when you feel pressure from me for
Correct.
certain aspects, and that may be even a softer thing, because consensual and non-consensual sounds closer to rape, and and things like that. But if I,
Well,
if I'm saying, hey, do you ever feel pressure, particularly to do something that you may or may not want to do in the moment or ever,
right.
that
And
would be an interesting
oh,
conversation.
totally. You're looking at that whole spectrum of, when does I wouldn't say non-consensual, but have I ever felt pressure? Sure. Right. And like, okay, so let's talk about that. I want to know, because I don't like the idea of my partner ever feeling pressure. Or when is that pressure actually an okay thing, where it's like, well, I feel some pressure and it's really because I'm just not in the mood, but I'm willing to possibly be put in the mood. What are you offering? Like, and so this now opens up a dialogue and a conversation as couples, to understand not only what does our history look like, what does it look like between us at this current time, and then what does us learning together on how to shift and change that moving forward. It opens up so much opportunity for conversation that couples need to be having.
And I'm going to extrapolate this beyond, because I think, I I have seen lots of, particularly addicts, that put pressure on or manipulate a situation to serve themselves, ultimately. And it can be work, it can be anything. So this, like, we're talking in a very specific thing, but I love what you're talking about earlier with consent, like, our best relationships. And you had said this before about, the best
Boundaries.
relationships had the most boundaries. And I remember kind of cocking my head and going like, but I've requoted you a lot on that, because as I know, seriously, as I was considering it, I was like, yeah, like when you have the understanding, and you're able to ask questions and all of those things, then you understand the ebb and flow of a relationship and how that works. But I was thinking, it's, if your sister, takes your clothes and you've told her no, that's not consent. I mean, it's like one of those
Oh,
things where
totally.
it goes on all levels of relationship.
Absolutely. So I think it's such a powerful thing for us to really start looking at and realizing, sure, in the sexual relationship, because that is such a vulnerable experience for any person, right? It's potentially why it's the most violating experience, but it really plays out everywhere. And if we learn how to do consent in a relationship on every level, whether it's I think I've told the story before, but whether it's using or not using my wife's loofah, right?
Yeah.
You've heard me, we've talked
Yeah,
about
I
that.
do. But yeah, but it's a great, it's a great
Yeah, but
example,
right, because at that point I realized, maybe at that point I was offended, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you don't think it's okay that I use it. But then I go, if you don't want me to use it, why would I ever want to violate that?
Mhm.
Right?
Mhm.
Because I want you to feel trust from me all the time, every moment of our relationship. I don't ever want you to feel a lack of safety and trust in our relationship. And now I sit there and I go, and why would I want that in any relationship? So yeah, it's a beautiful thing, but it has to start with conversations. One of those vulnerable conversations is going to be, let's talk about our sexual history.
I also think it's one of those things where, like, because you kind of use an example too of like, well, okay, or whatever. I don't want my partner to be angry. I don't want whatever. So I'm going to do these things. And so it feels like I'm giving consent, but I'm not honoring myself. I'm not really like, I'm kind of glossing over how I feel. So the ability to examine and own where I'm at in this moment, what I really want and don't want, and be able to
Mhm.
articulate that, can be a challenge too.
Yes. And I, one of the reasons I'll ask the question, how many non-consensual experiences have you had, or relationships or whatever, is it makes people think, and they might go, you know what? I don't think it was consensual, but I don't know that I communicated that in a way that the other
Mm,
person would have any idea, right? There's that. There's also, when you have people who are in unhealthy sexual belief systems or the way that they behave, they don't know, meaning maybe they've never learned the signs to look for of whether or not this is consent, right? And so if you think about that, I might be so unhealthy in my understanding of consent that if anybody was to say, have you ever pushed non-consent sexually? And I'd be like, oh, of course not. But then if I look at it and I go, you know what? If I proposition somebody and they're not like, in some sense, yeah, like this, that sounds good, let's try, let's play, like whatever it might be, if they're not engaged, if they're just silent, right? A healthy person will proposition somebody, and if they see silence, coldness, a healthy person's like, I'm not getting the vibes,
mm,
right? An unhealthy person says, well, they didn't say no, so they,
mm.
of course they want it. And it's like, oh my gosh, tell me more about how unaware you are, if that makes any sense.
No, it does, and I think that and I'm not picking on addicts, but we, I think, come to this table, with a lot of gaps and and like you were talking about reading the room, and I'm like, that can be really challenging because we just don't have the ability early on in this process.
Right.
So the ability to say, I'm curious, and hold the space and not go, what do you mean you don't it will take emotional regulation and the willingness to put yourself in a kind of a tricky spot. Like they could say, no, I really hate it when you do that, and I've been afraid to tell you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, and I will work on changing that. Wow.
But if you think about that concept, I can put just as much. This is going to sound really weird. And if somebody were to take this wrong, they'll misunderstand what I'm really trying to say. But there is a burden on partners as well, because I can't tell you how many partners I've worked with over the years who, if early on I would say, have you ever had any consensual experiences, and they're like, oh, never. And then as we start working together and they start to understand their wants and needs and their likes and dislikes, and they suddenly gain this awareness over the years from how they didn't even know what non-consent looked like, felt like, and now they're looking back going, I didn't want this and that and the other. And it's how they're able to turn around and go, all of these really bad things happened to me, but because I didn't even know what my wants and needs were, I didn't even know how to say no. I didn't know how to say yes. I didn't, because I would actually argue that knowing how to say yes is just as important in consent as knowing how to say no. And any variation in there, right? Like saying yes to consent is powerful and amazing. And I mean that again in every aspect, but also sexually, right? So rather than being like an object sexually where you're just like, well, I'm up for whatever, I guess I'm willing, it's, oh no, I want that, right?
Mhm.
Learning how to consent to what you want and desire sexually. I want you to try and help me have this transformative experience is so incredibly powerful. So when we talk about consent, it goes way beyond just like no or maybe. I mean, it's this ability to powerfully go, I know what I want. And that's amazing and so empowering. So anyway, I hope that wasn't too much of a
No,
tangent.
I no, but and so I've got a question for you. Like I was thinking, like, okay, if you're a kid and your aunt and uncle are coming and smothering you and nobody's stepping in and going, enough. Like
Or,
I'm
hey
thinking,
kid, do you
how
like
often is
that?
this right? And how often is this not modeled, for kids to learn that, and then this transforms into the relationship. So I don't know a yes or a no, or like I didn't know I had an opportunity. Is that a frequent pattern?
Oh, I think it's incredibly frequent. And I think it's important for us. Like, I remember one time, I'm a huge touch guy. I love cuddling with my kids and my wife. And I mean, even friends and buddies of mine. I mean, cuddling, touch, massages, whatever, right? Like, I'm really big on touch and connection. But because of my own experiences in my life that were harmful as a child, my own trauma, I didn't understand boundaries super well. And I've had to learn and change a lot. Even within the last few years, I've gained a whole incredible amount of insight into that. But I remember one time in particular, this buddy of mine who knew that I love touch and connection. We were just hanging out and my kids were just crawling all over me. And I stopped, guys, I don't want any touch right now. Right. You can stay here and let's talk and let's play, but do not touch me. And I remember him telling me in the moment, he's like, whoa, right? Like and I look at that and go, hopefully I modeled for my kids. They know I love touch. They know I love to give touch. But there's also times where I can say, no, don't touch me. I don't want that. But we don't often model that, especially when we say to our kids things like, oh, he didn't mean anything by it. Like, oh, just let her do this and it's okay. Don't I'm trying to think of a phrase, but like, don't take that personal. You're being too sensitive,
Mhm.
right? We say these things and we essentially send the message to our kids or others. Your needs and wants don't matter. So don't bother trying to figure out your yes and no of consent. And a lot of times we do that because we're uncomfortable. Hey, look, kid, don't make me uncomfortable. Like, this is how our family does things, and I don't want to be the one that tells Aunt Betsy that she's not allowed to kiss you on the lips, right? Like, if that makes any sense, or what,
Yeah,
take
no, it
any
does, and it
scenario.
and often in those family systems that happened to them, and so that it's like,
Right.
yeah, that's what I grew up with too. Like that's just how we are.
Yeah.
And so I think it's an opportunity, for those that are parents to go like, we're going to learn to practice these things, in with our children, so that they have the opportunity to own their bodies and own their boundaries.
For sure.
We have some questions. Yay. Okay. The first one, my ex-wife who divorced me over a year ago because my porn betrayal is now my current girlfriend. She tells me that I continue to make choices to not show up for her pain. How can I express to her that I'm not consciously choosing to hurt her? What is her attachment bid with this request of hers? In your opinion, what is she really trying to tell me?
Yeah, I love the question. I will tell you, I'm going to probably ask you to add a little bit more in here in just a moment, because
Mhm.
so let's first of all, have you ever like honored her? Because the fact that she divorced you and now is your girlfriend, talk about like a willingness to try and rebuild trust and safety, like that's huge. What a vulnerable thing. That in and of itself is a major attachment bid. Now, she tells you that you continue to make choices to not show up for her pain. What I'm hearing there, if I'm hearing it correctly, a little bit of confusion here, but if I'm hearing it correctly, she's telling you that she believes that you're consciously choosing to hurt her. Now, the attachment bid there is really her saying, how could you do this? If you love and care about me, you would never consciously choose to hurt her. And so, first of all, I'm going to stop and ask myself, am I consciously doing that? And, or am I unconsciously doing that? So I'm going to try and slow that down within myself to find out, is there truth there? So I'm going to take her perspective. I'm going to sit with it. I'm going to ask myself and be honest with myself. Am I consciously trying to do that? Now, most of us, I would argue, aren't consciously trying to hurt another individual. I would say that most of us try not to be exploitative in that way. However, so let's rule out the fact that you are consciously doing it. What she's saying is, this is what it feels like. And so I'm going to try and lean into that. Hey, it has to feel horrible that it feels like I'm consciously trying to hurt you. Like, I don't know why you would want to build trust with me if I'm consciously trying to hurt you. So the attachment bid there is for her to say, can we figure this out? Because if you're consciously doing it, I don't think I want to connect. But the fact that she's still with you and trying to tell you this, my guess is that these are the words she's using to say, I'm in pain. And so if you want to get caught up in whether it's conscious or not, that may not actually be the most important. It may be what I'm going to do is lean in this situation and try to say to her, hey, was this, before she says anything to me, I'm going to be like, whoa, was this one of those moments where it felt like I consciously tried to hurt you? And if she's like, yes, and I'm like, oh my goodness, okay, can you walk me through, help me understand what happened, help me understand your hurt? Because I don't want to keep hurting you in this way, but I need to learn more about what's happening here. Are you willing to continue to be vulnerable as we figure this out? And I'm on the lookout now. What are any signs or clues, right? So now I'm learning to read the room in regard to this particular pain that she's bringing up. And I'm just going to check it in. And I have to be careful because listen to what I'm saying. I will learn to do this till it's almost annoying. Why? Because if I learn to do it and she's almost annoyed, what she's hearing every time I check it in, hey, is this one of those moments where you feel like I'm trying to hurt you? If I keep doing that, she starts to go, oh, he really cares and he's trying, right? Like, especially if you're at least getting it, I'm going to just make this up, but 50% of the time, she's like, oh my gosh, he really cares. And that conscious, not conscious thing almost will disappear because it's really not about that. She just wants you to know she's in pain. And she wants to know, are you going to be attuned and react and be impacted by her pain? So that, in my opinion, is the overall attachment bid. She's really just trying to figure out, do I matter enough to where you can become conscious, you can shift this, we can work together so that I can stop feeling pain, at least in this area. And my argument is, I would also argue that what she's also trying to do is, and teach me, what am I doing to hurt you? Let's figure out how to hurt each other less and bring each other more pleasure in life, which is, again, if we were to use the consent concept, is what consent is all about. How do we gain less? How do we have less pain and more pleasure in our shared relationship?
And there's a follow-up, but I have a question for you before I read that, because I'm also wondering if you can think about every time she says this, can you kind of do the autopsy on what was happening right before that? So you kind of get a little bit of a clue that, oh, here's the pattern. So you can be on the lookout for it. It isn't like, I don't even know what I'm looking for. But he followed up, I have honored her by telling her that I am thankful for her courage of stepping back into the relationship. In theory, I guess I am choosing to stay inside my head rather than show up for her pain each time she needs me to show up for her pain.
So that is a very normal thing that most of us do, especially if we don't understand. So one of my favorite emotions is confusion, because it gives way for curiosity, and curiosity gives way for connection. But confusion is the most common thing. Tammy, did I freeze up?
I think you're freezing because I don't think I am. Yeah, it is. I think it's your, but yes, keep going. My
Do I need to
favorite is
repeat anything?
curiosity. No, because it's confusion because that leads to curiosity. Now finish
And
this sentence.
curiosity leads to connection, right? And so when you say, I guess I'm choosing to stay inside of my head, that's actually a very normal experience when we're confused, because we want to make sense of it and be like, no, that's not what's happening. We want to argue with her when she says, you're choosing to hurt me. And we want to go, no, I would never. How dare I? Instead of the real issue, which is, oh, you're hurt? Oh my gosh, let's talk about your hurt. You matter to me. And so you staying in your head is like the most beautiful, accountable way. If you can recognize that's the issue, you're staying in your head rather than leaning into her pain and saying to her, oh, your hurt matters to me. Regardless of the intention, I need to figure out how to show up differently for you because you matter to me. And so what's cool is she keeps giving you opportunities to hurt her because she keeps giving you opportunities to love her. And so if you can practice getting out of your head and actually sitting in her pain, too many of us, we take it personal and we just are like, no, I'm not hurting you. I can't believe you keep telling me. It's like, shut up, dude. Like, just say, oh my gosh, you're hurt. I'm so sorry. Tell me more about your pain. Tell me how I can show up for you and soothe your pain. And let me learn and let me slowly practice changing this. And that just, it takes time, but I'll tell you, most partners get it. And they're like, I'm fine. Let's take all the time we need as long as I'm feeling and seeing hopeful improvement.
Well, and I'm thinking, if I'm staying in my head, I'm going to look really shut down to someone else and I'm not going to look engaged at all. One of the things that I have found to be most helpful is I'm scared to talk to you about this because I'm afraid I'm going to do it wrong. I'm like, this is going to be like as soon as I own whatever it is, then I go, now I can show up, but I'm afraid and I want to learn more. And so I'm going to try
Yeah.
and we'll see where this goes. But as soon as you do that, then like you're not going to do it perfectly. Goodness, you've had no practice. So like just own that. Yeah, I'm gonna try. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm willing to learn and I want to learn. And that is such a different place than staying all shut. You're staying safe in your head, and guess what? Like that's still the disconnection. Nothing's going to change, if you stay stuck in your head. Okay, the next question. Can you speak about how grandiosity or victimhood on either end of the partnership as the betrayer or betrayed partner impacts reconciliation? My partner goes to either end of this, and I think it's really impacting his ability to truly empathize with me.
Yeah. Grandiosity and victimhood really are two opposite ends of the same place. And what that is it's the person really just so I'm going to say this, it's going to sound really harsh, but and it's going to imply intent, and I don't necessarily mean to imply intent, but grandiosity and victimhood are really an avoidance of accountability. Now, whether the person has any idea that that's actually what they're doing or not is a whole nother conversation. But it's essentially the lack of accountability, because it's either, then the way I like to refer to it, it's either I'm over accountable or under accountable, and it's to those extremes, right? And I could argue that within both grandiosity or victimhood, there's both under and over accountability, right? A healthy accountability is that space where I don't have to go to victimhood in order to get my needs met. I can own my experience. I don't have to go to grandiosity in order to deflect blame and accountability, or accountability for that matter. And so it absolutely will impact the ability to be empathized with or to be understood. It will also not create any room for actual safety to be developed, right? No accountability really means no safety. And I've always struggled, like early on, I was like, oh, I love the word safety. Safety is this really weird, broad word. And I'll hear partners most often say, well, I need to feel safe. I would actually argue if we're going to be a little bit more accountable, we have to lean in and understand, well, what feels unsafe? I can't just throw out the word I'm unsafe. I actually need to get a little deeper to understand what feels unsafe. What exactly does that mean? And so it's a word that gets a little bit lost in the recovery world because it's maybe overused, not because it doesn't have a meaning, but because it has a lack of interpretation or understanding from the hearer. But so you're not going to feel safe in the relationship because if someone's not accountable, they're going to deflect any emotion. They're not going to be with you in your pain. They're not going to empathize with you. And even with, if I can recognize somebody's hurt and pain, I don't even have to necessarily own their pain and say, I meant to hurt you to even empathize, right? If I'm in a healthy place and I can go, well, if I meant to hurt you, I can own it. And if I didn't, I can own it, right? But I can still empathize with your hurt, right? Like with the person that we just commented with the last question, stay out of even trying to own one way or another. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I totally tried to hurt you. I mean, I guess unless it's accurate, right? But we get too much into the argument. Well, the grandiosity and victimhood is really a coping mechanism that this individual has most likely learned as a way of to survive, right? I either have to be perfect and like, how dare you see me in a negative light, or I'm the ultimate victim and like, how could you blame me? And like, I'm the one that needs help here. I'm the one that's been injured. You've injured me by telling me that I've injured you. Um, sorry.
No, no, it's making me laugh. Yeah. Oh, you've injured me by telling me I've injured you. Like,
Right, like how dare you? I can't believe you see me in that light. And
yeah.
like, even though I get it, and we're going to need to spend time, if somebody truly feels injured by being told that their partner was injured, right? We're going to have to spend time and learn to pull you out of that victimhood, right? We got to spend time and figure out, why did you learn the grandiosity? Like, that's where I have to get curious as a clinician. Now, as a partner, you could try it. It seems like, but I'll tell you, you start throwing out words like, "Oh, you're in victimhood, you're in grandiosity." You're usually not going to get anywhere because people are just going to interpret that as like name calling and labeling. But if you can get curious about that pattern, why does this seem to occur? Last time I told you I was hurt, you started talking about why you were hurt. Why does that happen? Where did you learn when somebody shares that they're in pain, that you now talk about your pain? That doesn't make sense to me. Where did you learn it? Right? That might be one way that you can try and work out of that pattern, but that's a slow process. I think I answered your question, even though there's lots of places we could go with this.
Yeah, this could be a whole webinar in and of itself. But I, at the end of it where he says, it's impacting his ability to truly empathize with me. Yes, because both of those are self-centered, self-focused. It's like I'm the best thing ever, or I'm, we talk about like shame a lot at, our residential treatment program, if with an impact letter, and we don't call it an impact letter, it's like, how has, the addict's behavior, affected you? Because an impact letter can get caught up with a disclosure. But, and the guys will listen to this and they'll immediately go to, oh, I'm so horrible. And I'm so, and that's like, that completely takes it away from the partner. This is a partner sharing real hurts and pains in a way to hopefully help the addict partner understand and be able to move towards them. And they're immediately going to, oh, I'm so horrible. And so Dr. Rob and the team will be going, now you're making it all about you, and you're not taking into consideration this other person's, how it's affecting them. And so that's what I read with this is, completely off the mark for any kind of empathy.
For sure. And it's part of the recovery process is learning that healthy accountability, learning, like, the reality of it is that I could very easily say that I've been victimized in my life. Many of us can. And I think there was a place where I had to learn that I've been victimized, but I don't have to be a victim. And that process is really powerful. There is so much accountability and healthy space there that there have been certain areas in my life where I've been victimized. But I'm not going to stay in a victim place, in part because a victim, I'll say it this way, and I don't know if this is exactly right, but that victim space is, I need someone to rescue me. And the reality of it is, I've and it's been interesting. I've been doing some of my own EMDR therapy lately for myself, like seeing my own therapist, which I recommend every good therapist do. And I've recognized there has been a part of me in many places in my life where I was like, this is unfair. I want somebody to see the injustice and come and solve this problem because this is unfair. And that's absolutely can be 100% true. But guess what? We don't typically get better by somebody else coming in and solving our problem. We get better by figuring out, hey, I've been injured. How do I work through and solve my problem for me? And then ask people I love to show up for me in my life, not as my rescuer, but as my peer, maybe as a mentor. But I don't even want my mentors to solve my problems for me, although I don't mind a little help, like a little guidance. So
And I was thinking with this before I had a coughing fit, it's also, it probably shuts down any conversation, like so so another place of curiosity is, when I bring this up, you tend to go to this language and it shuts down conversation. I'm curious about that and how we can get back on track to having a conversation. Or, like Matt was talking about, where did you learn this? That, like, if I do these things, it shuts down conversation and we never deal with it. But if we're not willing to be vulnerable and move into those difficult places, we can't move through it either. Then we're always stuck in this spot, and we're not making progress that would ultimately bring us together in a, much deeper way. To me, this is one of those where it really feels like, working with a qualified professional, because it feels like there's some stuckness, for probably the two of you. So, okay. Probably last question. We'll see. My husband
probably.
acted out during work hours. Oh, wow. And for business travel, he never made excuses to leave and disappear for questionable amounts of time. When I found out about the acting out, I was shocked. He was doing everything right to begin with and continue a strong recovery. And I have boundaries put in place for my safety. But how do I move toward healing? I feel like I will never trust him again.
This is a wonderful question. And I would say, honestly, difficult to answer, because you really are probably going to need to explore, like, the next webinar. I'll probably hit principle number 2, and that is basically, a healthy sexual relationships needs to be non-exploitative. And the most common exploitation that occurs in, like, a husband and wife scenario, for using this as an example, is when the relational agreement was not honored, right? And so the tough part is that I think the biggest hurt here is that he was able to put on an image that he was acting within the relational agreement. And what you're coming to terms with, what you're shocked by, is that honestly, he had the ability to do it. And in that, he has the capability to do it again, right? Like it sometimes is easier in a partner relationship to look and see, wow, here's all the bad behaviors. And now that he's living differently, I feel safe. And you're going, well, how do I feel safe? He's living what looks to be the same as he always lived before. And so what I would probably say is that one of the things that he has to learn how to do that he didn't do before is to have conversations about his emotional vulnerability. Because my guess is he wasn't opening up to you about his hurts and his loneliness and his stress and his whatever difficulty. My guess is, and this is what makes it difficult, because not only are we almost out of time, so I can't ask you more questions really today because we won't have time for me to answer them. But my guess is that what you're going to have to see is more of a transformation from the inside out, because his behavior was already within, like, the behavior that you could visibly see prior to being hurt, what would have looked normal. And so he's going to need to practice, well, what parts of me weren't opening up and being vulnerable with her? And okay, so I see you responded, but what parts of me were hurt that he wasn't being vulnerable? And so your trust now is in you recognizing he now knows how to get vulnerable. And if you're banking on, but I need to see a behavior change, well, then that's the behavior you're looking for. And so you're now going to probably have to do some work around getting more vulnerable. And this is the hardest thing for a partner to hear me say, is that ultimately you have to, over time, slowly, give him more room to hurt you. Because that's how trust is built. Not by saying, fine, I'm going to let you hurt me. It's, I'm going to give you more room to build trust. But when I give you more room to build trust, I also give you more room to hurt me. And I'm going to give you more room to build trust and more room to build trust. And over time, I get back to that place, and even further than I was before, where I give him power to hurt me worse than he's ever hurt me before, because that's what an intimate relationship looks like. And you're like, how can I ever trust him again? Well, I would say you already are. You already have. Now, if what you're saying is, how can I never be afraid again? Well, you're going to need to work on your fear and how to work through your fear in healthy ways so it doesn't consume you. It sounds like you're already working on trusting him, and that you are giving him opportunities to trust and break trust. It may not be about trust that you're saying, how do I not feel afraid again? That's a whole nother question and a whole nother answer. So I don't know if I'm landing that right, but that's why I had so much hesitancy. I love that feedback. That's why I had so much hesitancy in jumping in and answering that right away.
And I just have a quick, because we're out of time, but he knew all along he was cheating. You did not.
Right.
So your timeline started when you had discovery. You were shocked. It's in capital letters, you know. So your timeline, this is a grief process, and there's fear, but I'm reading the grief of, like, oh my gosh, nothing I ever knew was like all of those things. So
Yeah.
you said he's doing everything right, and probably not everything right. He's doing a lot of right things, and trust is rebuilt over time, and you will never be able to trust him 100% like you used to, because he can be, he can betray you. That said,
Yeah.
he can build the trust, and you can have a more honest relationship, and you'll trust your gut. You will have your radar, and you'll go, something's a little bit off. And so it's not going to be perfect. This is a process. I'm sorry you're in the, like, it's the grief. I will never trust him again. I try not to use always and nevers because it's not
Well,
as black and white.
but what the expression of the never there is the
Mhm.
intensity, right? And
Yes.
so,
Yeah. I was shocked and never,
yes, and like I've tried to encourage people, if like I used to say, don't ever use I can't even think of the word expletive. No, it's not expletives. It's that word where you don't use words that are always and never, right?
the extremes,
The
so
extremes. But I've actually found that if we learn to listen to those superlatives, thank
there you
you.
go. Okay.
I've learned if we learn to listen to the superlatives, it's the person's expression of intensity. And so it actually, I think, are super helpful. But I want to read that feedback that somebody just gave me, because I actually thought it was really vulnerable. Somebody shared their constructive feedback. They said, please, Matt, shorten your sentences. It gets hard to follow when sentences are so long. I actually really love that feedback. I will work on that. I know why my sentences are long. And it's often because I'm constructing my thought as I'm speaking, and like trying to put the connections together. I will totally try and work on that. I actually really appreciate it. And if anybody else has any feedback for me, let me know.
He likes to have ands to connect pieces of the sentence. So
I honestly, I when I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh, I am surprised I haven't heard that yet before.
no, it's all good. Yeah. Like, no, but like, even in that, you were like you had multiple ands. So
Oh,
it's all good.
it was awesome. I actually really
Yeah.
appreciated that.
Yeah.
That actually shows that somebody trusts that
They're paying attention. Yeah.
well, and that they trust that like I can take the feedback, and like
Yeah.
that
No,
actually shows that they recognize I'm a type of person that might be able to hear it. I love it.
I think your explanations are very helpful. Thank you. And thanks for the questions. You guys, you don't know how excited we are to have questions to answer. So please come back. We'll be here in 2 weeks. Debbie will be on in next week. But lots of other resources for you between now and then. So
Yep.
thanks everyone. Thanks,
All right.
Matt.
See you next
Bye.
time, guys.